Hello everyone, welcome back to the bunker. It's time once again for the never-ending and always unpredictable Comic Vault. Today, we're going to take a look at something I had never heard of prior to a few weeks ago. It's Chakan the Forever Man. Yeah, Chakan. What in the world is Chakan? It's the very question that I asked a while back when a couple of friends of mine came to me and asked me to guest on their podcast to talk about a really obscure Sega Genesis game of the same name, Chakan the Forever Man, a game based on a really underground comic book that was self-published by a guy named Robert Krause, a really talented kind of pop artist who was doing a lot of conventions in the late 80s, early 90s, and a game developer came to him at a convention and suggested that Chakan might be a really good video game. And it blows my mind that this happened, a thing that was not in the public eye, that nobody had ever heard of, gets its own video game, and a really faithful game to this material. You'd think this had a big fan base if you went and looked, if you could get your hands on them, if you went and looked at the comics that this game was based on. And it is also one of the most notoriously difficult Sega Genesis games there is. I spent a lot of time with it and reviewed it very thoroughly with the guys on a Genesis Gems. So Aaron and Nick over there, I've been friends with these guys for a couple of years, been listening to their podcast for a long time, and I've guested with them for some of their Patreon content, and they asked me to come on and talk about this because I was the closest thing they knew to a comics expert. And they're like, oh, a comic game, we should ask Captain Logan to come on. And of course, it was a thing that I had never heard of, so I had to delve into this a little bit and find out something about it. I have read just the first issue, which is an oversized, not quite graphic novel length, but a standalone issue. It is a #1. There are some other issues past it. It does continue into a 2 and a 3 at least, but it was a piece of its own that Krause and another friend of his, Bob Pryor, worked on together, and he did most of the pencil work, but Pryor did the inking for him, and it is, I say pencil work, a lot of it is fully painted, even though it's in black and white, and these guys did a remarkable job on the art for this. It is pretty stellar, most of it, I think. It harkens back a little bit, I think, to Frank Frazetta. It's got a little bit of a Conan the Barbarian look, mixed with a lot of kind of pulp horror stuff, and story-wise, it's got a very Fable vibe. I don't mean the comic Fables, but it just reads like a fable, or like a parable. And it harkens back to a lot of Greek mythology. And so it's this very Spawn-like book 3 years before Spawn, and I'll talk a little bit about the ways that it parallels McFarlane's work before McFarlane even put out Spawn. Now, it might be influenced a little bit by McFarlane because his artwork was already really prominent at Marvel, and this would have been during his Spider-Man heyday, just around as he's leaving that book. And so I think Chakan is kind of what Spawn should have been like. It's like Spawn if it was more straightforward. It makes sense that the devil chooses this guy, and he doesn't have amnesia, and he is a little bit more likable than Spawn, even though he's supposed to be more psychopathic and kind of has lost himself even more than Al Simmons is supposed to. Kind of ironic that it ends up working out that way. So the idea is that Chakan was a sorcerer going way back, you know, hundreds or thousands of years ago. And he has all of these amazing powers that he's built up on his own. He knows alchemy, and he has all of these magic spells, and he can do no wrong. Nobody seems to be able to take him down. And he is kind of an egomaniac and is really full of himself, but he nearly earns it. Like, he is as good as he says he is, at least in dealing with any mortal man, as far as being able to, win any fight, take over anything he wants to. He can basically have anything he wants at this point. And he keeps going around saying, I could fell death itself. And so death itself comes to him, basically the devil, and says, I challenge you to a duel. It's basically like the devil went down to Georgia without fiddles. And he accepts this fight, and if Chakan wins, he gets to be immortal, and if he loses, the devil gets his soul, of course. And so they fight on every plane of existence, and Chakan ends up winning. But the devil comes up behind his back while he's celebrating. He's basically doing a fancy Dan. The devil comes out behind him and stabs him in the back. And Chakan does indeed get his immortality, because the devil is not going to renege on his word, as it says in the book, but the devil is, of course, also in the details. And so, like with Spawn, he doesn't quite understand what it was he was signing up for. Now, in this case, it's not in desperation like it is with Al Simmons, where he's afraid he's never going to see his wife again and he is dead and he has nothing to lose. This guy has everything to lose, but he also thinks that he can do no wrong, that there's no chance that he can lose, and so he accepts the devil's terms without, for lack of a better way of putting it, looking at the fine print. And so Chakan is indeed able to live forever, but he loses most of his powers, and he has to wear the visage of death, and he is not going to be able to get any rest until he has, so he's going to live forever, but he's going to want to die because he's going to be in pain all the time. And the devil knows that he's not going to actually like his immortality. And he says, you're never going to have rest until you have slain every supernatural evil there is. And so he's forced on a daily basis to go around trying to find all of Earth's supernatural evils, which are given to him in an Angel Cordelia-esque vision in his dreams every day. And so he has to constantly see all of these evil creatures doing horrible things to people in order to find them and slay them. Now, I kind of wish that Chakan actually learned more of a humility lesson in this. I think that there is some overcompensation on Krause's part in trying not to make a traditional superhero. And I think there was a lot of this going on in the late 80s, early 90s. We make these anti-heroes who are not very likable at all, and that it's difficult to sympathize with because we don't want them to be perfect, so we go too far the other way. Where they're so imperfect, they also become less relatable than I think the artist wants them to be. Again, I think this character is more relatable than Spawn, and certainly has more of a potential to be more relatable than Spawn. And maybe there are some issues of this book, because I haven't read anything past this and the Compendium, which is a lot of short stories about Chakan. It is certainly possible that Krause has written some things where Chakan shows a little bit more compassion, and he certainly cares about the girl that he saves in this. So he's going after the final evil. I really like that his first issue looks like a last issue. This is a really neat idea. So he's going after the last evil, the supernatural evil on Earth, which is trying to take in, I don't know if it's going to devour this girl or what exactly it's going to do to it. I'm assuming that it's a sustenance situation, but in order to keep this monster at bay, there's this small town that is giving up, they're really kind of typical situation, human sacrifice. So there's this pretty girl that it puts up as a sacrifice, and again, that's those pages, particularly when she's tied up and is, kind of wearing revealing, ripped apart clothing, is about to be sacrificed up to the demon or the monster. It looks like kind of a, Conan kind of panel, kind of a Frazetta sort of panel. And I do like that this girl is a little bit more strong-willed than some of these kinds of characters are, and Chakan saves her, but she in turn also helps Chakan. I don't want to say saves him because he's the Forever Man. He can't die. He's sort of like Resurrection Man in DC, except Resurrection Man does die and keeps coming back with different powers. This guy doesn't have a lot of his powers, and he cannot die. So anyway, so you have Resurrection Man and you have the Forever Man. And so so he does care about that girl, and she is immediately enamored with him, of course. And it's that situation where she's you know, really wanting to get with her savior, and he says, I've lived, you know, so many hundreds of years, and I've seen, or however long it's been, and everybody in my life always dies. It's that kind of, you know, standard now. We've seen this in a lot of things at this point, maybe not as much in '89, a situation where you have a person that lives forever, and that's a curse more than it's a blessing. So you might fall in love with someone and have a few years of happiness, but it's always finite. You really want to grow old with your lover. You don't want to watch them get old and then have the awkwardness of, I'm not getting old with you. There tends to be some jealousy there, and some resentfulness. And also, you have to deal with watching them die, so he doesn't ever get close to anyone. And I get why this guy is kind of crazy. All of this would drive you crazy. But as I said earlier, I wanted to see a little bit more humility from this character, because the whole point was to teach him that. The whole point seems to be kind of this cautionary tale for the reader. No matter how good you are at something, don't get too big for your britches. And that's what happens to this guy. And you'd think that he would be this almost kind of wise sage character at some point. And again, maybe he's like that in some other places, but this sort of reads like he just wants to die. He just wants everything to be over with. And it's still kind of a selfish motive, like it always was before. Maybe the tragedy is supposed to be that the man never learned anything. But I just, personally, I just feel like the book would maybe resonate a little bit more if it was the sort of too little too late thing, where the guy can't really have a life now, but he really has learned a lot. That's really kind of my lone criticism of this book. And it's 40 pages, and I've not read much beyond this, so I don't know how fair that is moving forward. I know that in the compendium, Chakan hates unicorns for no good reason, and just flat out murders a unicorn, which is not actually a supernatural evil and doesn't deserve to die. It's just like rainbows and butterflies, like literally, and it's really funny because it's in really cutesy art, and then Chakan just comes out and murders it, and it reads like it's kind of just for a joke, but it's like Chakan kind of just does a lot of violent things because the book wants to revel in violence a little bit. It is that sort of thing. It seems to make an excuse of the anti-hero in order to just be really brutal and violent, which is funny. I guess I've gotten a little bit desensitized to a lot of violence over the years, and after doing Spawn Year and reading so much of McFarlane's work, that this stuff reads kind of tame compared to some other things that I've looked at now. But anyway, so the idea here is giving us the origin and what initially reads as the last Chakan story all at the same time. So the structure of this is wonderful. Chakan is trying to take down the last supernatural evil, and then that is interrupted for a minute with his origin, and I already broke that down earlier. So you see him fight death, and you see death win, and like Malbolgia in Spawn, you see him really laugh at Chakan's expense. Now, I will say, I don't completely understand what's in it for the devil, except for having a good hearty laugh. Like, I don't know why death wants all of these supernatural evils destroyed. I wouldn't think that that would be, I mean, I don't know anything about the mythology of this devil, or if there even is a hell or anything. It doesn't go into that, at least in this issue, like we do with the really convoluted celestial stuff in Spawn. I appreciate that it's not this big giant grand plan that's super overly complicated and that never really makes sense. It's not, you know, I've got big plans for Spawn, and it's a big secret because the writer doesn't even really know what it is. It's not like that. With this, it's just, go kill supernatural evils, and you're never going to rest, and ha ha ha, joke's on you. And I wouldn't think that it would be the devil's responsibility to take out supernatural evils. I would think that it would want those things around. So like when all the supernatural evils are around or are gone, I would think that it would be harder for the devil to get souls. I would think that that would be one of the things that sent him souls. So I don't totally know what's in it for him. That's a place where maybe the mythology is breaking down a little bit, but perhaps there's a place where that's finally explained. I know that Krause over the years has written a whole lot of graphic novels about Chakan, and you can get those on his website, and I'm thinking about ordering some of them. Like I said, today I'm just talking about this first issue and giving you kind of a breakdown of who this character is, but he's written some 12, 16, maybe more graphic novels beyond this and that short story compendium, and a lot of those were never released anywhere except for on his website, and he only printed 1,000 of them. As far as I can tell, he still has copies of all of them, and so it's a low print run. There's not very many of them. This is again still very, very underground. So if this sounds interesting to you, and especially if you like Spawn and you like the look of this guy, because I haven't really talked about his look, but he looks like Gunslinger Spawn, or I should say Gunslinger Spawn looks like him. Krause describes him as a cross between a zombie and Clint Eastwood, and the book does have kind of a Western vibe also. It kind of sandwiches together kind of Greek mythology, sort of mythos with like old school, fable, and then more contemporary Western stuff in tone and atmosphere. And so anyway, so I don't know anything about the other Chakan stories, but I'm kind of curious about them, and I might start picking those up. They're $10 a piece on his website, and Nick bought the compendium there to see if that website was still working, and if he could actually get that book, and he got it after a couple days over the weekend. So. And that is directly through Krause, I believe. So you can definitely still get these books from him if this sounds interesting to you. So when you get to the end, Chakan, of course, slays the beast without too much trouble, but it's this big epic fight under the stars. The artwork is just wonderful. And then at the end, Chakan stabs himself through the gut. He's ready to die, and he's taken out all the supernatural evils, so he thinks that this is going to be it for him. But of course, he is the Forever Man, and there is a loophole. And the devil says from the very beginning, you will never be able to rest. And what I told you could do is never going to happen. And Chakan thinks, well, you just don't think that I'm capable of taking out all the supernatural evils, but I can totally do it. And he does, and it still doesn't work. And so death comes to him because we need something to exposit what is happening now. And he says, so look, you took out all the supernatural evils on Earth, but what about all those planets out there? You're not the only place with sentient life, but you're at a really primitive place he's basically in the Middle Ages, and you're in a very primitive time period on Earth. You're going to have to wait around for space travel before you can go out there and go to all these other planets. And so now there's kind of a cosmic component to this, and he would have to go to every other planet in the universe and take out all of those supernatural evils before he's able to finally rest. And I would wonder if even after he did that, the devil would reveal, well, there's a multiverse, there's all these counter-Earths, and now you gotta go to all these different versions, these different dimensions, in order to take out all these evils. So the point is that Chakan is absolutely screwed, and if it weren't for his hubris in his earlier years, he would be able to, naturally pass like you're supposed to, and it's that kind of classic, what makes life worth living is that it doesn't last forever kind of message, but also that don't get too big for your britches sort of message. And I love that ending. I think that's really clever, and as Krause says in an interview that is printed with this first issue, you can tell any stories you want to with this character in any era. And so it's really easy to jump around and do all kinds of different things, sort of like Klaus with Frank Miller, his version of Santa Claus. You can take him really in any era, at least past when he first becomes Santa Claus, and go into the future with him. You could go into the future with Chakan too. And so I'm really curious to see what kinds of time periods Krause has maybe jumped around and done with this character, and see if maybe he kind of gains some dimension and gets a little bit more nuanced. So anyway, I just wanted to break down for you what this character is and what this first issue is like to read. As a comic book, it's really interesting. I should mention this too, because as you might might have noticed looking at the panels on the screen there are no dialogue balloons in this book, and there's no narration boxes to speak of either. This looks a lot more like a illustrated prose piece than it does an actual comic book, which is not really a problem, but it's just kind of an interesting way to go. I don't see this form a whole lot, and the compendium has even more of this kind of stuff, where you'll have like several paragraphs, like, you know, a whole page, a wall of text with just one or two pictures next to it. And so he's basically telling these prose short stories, and his prose is very purple prosy, but it's decently written. It's the right kind of melodrama for this kind of piece. And it kind of affords him to be able to focus on the images he wants to show you. And, you know, the art is sequential, but it's not as sequential as a standard comic book, right? Like, there are places where he kind of cuts corners so that he doesn't have to draw everything. Like, there's a place where it says, and then Chakan sheathed his swords before anybody could look. Like, it was so fast he sheathed his swords. You don't actually see the swords sheathed until, that's hard to say, a couple panels later, or even, I think, over the next page, because he's kind of using the prose in order to, you know, cut corners a little bit. So it really relies a lot on the words, but the words aren't always showing you exactly what you're seeing either. Like, it does read like an illustrated story, which also helps to kind of give it that fable vibe a little bit. So I really don't have a problem with the fact that there aren't dialogue balloons, but it took a little while to adjust to that. And I don't know if he ever went to a more traditional comic book format, or if all of his Chakan stuff is that way. But anyway, that's the book. Chakan, that's how it's pronounced, apparently. We did a little bit of research and found an interview with him and listened to him say Chakan. I wasn't sure if it was Chakan or Chakan. It's Chakan. And anyway, if you want to you know, emulate or try to get Chakan on Genesis, it's a pretty cheap cartridge. It's a really interesting game. You can listen to me and the Genesis Gems talk all about it in their podcast, and part of the reason I wanted to do this video was to talk about their podcast and suggest that you go listen to it. I wanted to give them a little bit of a plug for that. So the link is in the description, and you can listen to that on iTunes. They're on Spotify. They're in a bunch of, you know, pretty much everywhere you can listen to a podcast. And they've been doing this for a lot of years. They have 80, 90 some episodes, and their stuff's absolutely fantastic. I have had Aaron on the channel before, and I've had both he and Nick on for an interview talking about the Genesis Gems. They're really fun, neat, nice guys. They really know their stuff with old school video games, and if you like the 16-bit era like I do, and especially if you like Sega like I do, it's really worth going and taking a listen to their podcast. They're going through every Genesis game that they can, and breaking it down really thoroughly, and then deciding whether or not they think it is a gem or just good or garbage. And it's a whole lot of fun. It's been a lot of fun to be involved in, and it's my favorite podcast to listen to. So anyway, thanks a bunch for watching, everybody. Sure appreciate it. I'd love to hear from you if you happen to have ever heard of or read Chakan. We'd love to know if one person who watches this knows beyond the video game what Chakan is. And if you, and I guess what I was going to say a minute ago is, if you want to play that game, just know you need to get the PDF for the manual, because it's really difficult to figure out some of what you're supposed to do and how the game works if you don't look at the manual. It's one of those kinds of games, and it is super tough. It is playable, but it's tough. It's got a difficult kind of jump, and you've got to pick up some weapons before you can get very far. I recommend playing it on practice mode before you try to really do too much with it, because it is absolutely brutal, and it really makes you feel like Chakan. It makes you feel like you're going to be playing this game forever, and like you can't die, but sometimes you sort of wish you can. There's a meta component to that almost goes too far, because of how insanely frustrating it is. But I enjoyed it enough that it makes me want to eventually, finally, somehow beat that game. So check that out, and if you can get your hands on the Chakan comics, the original printing of that first issue is hard to get your hands on and very expensive in, most of the time if somebody's got one, but you can get the trades, and I think the compendium includes that first issue at Krause's website for just $10 a piece. So I've got the links in the description, both for Krause's website and also for the Genesis Gems podcast. Thanks a lot for watching, everybody. I'll see you again next time. I am Captain Logan, and happy reading.